when I listened to lectures on Reverend Moon's divine principle and unification thought here in the spirit world. I was so moved that I feel an ever-growing urge to be resurrected on earth every day.
This is where it all happened. On March 23, 2004, your elected officials took a break from authorizing Iraq war funds to crown Reverend Moon, the King of Peace. He put on majestic flowing robes and wore a golden crown and announced that from beyond the grave, dead presidents of the United States had endorsed him as the Messiah. Let's take a look.
King some young moon. After Salon.com broke the story last week, some of the very embarrassed lawmakers in attendance claimed they were duped.
I'm John Gorenfeld, and I broke that story. It took the New York Times and the Washington Post 3 months to catch up with my blog. And when they did, the Times editorial board compared the cult ritual to an act of the Roman Emperor Caligula. Roscoe Bartlett, 6-term Republican congressman from Maryland, brought Moon his robes and said after the event that he had no idea what was going to happen. Danny Davis, veteran Democratic congressman from Chicago, brought Mrs. Moon her crown and said he was just there to celebrate world peace. I've just written a book because I thought maybe it said something about how crazy our politics have become when congressmen bow down to a foreign cult leader and no one seems to care. Moon publishes a powerful newspaper, the Washington Times. He's given a ton of money to the religious right, and he calls our country the kingdom of Satan. This isn't a conspiracy theory. It isn't even a theory. It's just the story of a really rich guy who thinks he's the Messiah and his absurd relationship with America over the past 40 years. In the 1960s, when South Korea was still a poor, war-torn country, the factory owner who called himself Moon was considered ridiculous. Moon said Jesus had asked him as a teenager to save the world, but Koreans accused Moon of running an X-rated church where you could be born again by sleeping with 6 women. In 1965, he came to America and found himself right at home as the 60s turned into something creepier, the 70s. The new wave of cult leaders made vague, empty promises of peace and universal harmony, but often had other motives.
These pictures were taken just hours after the mass murder-suicide loaded bodies littered the ground. A barrel containing cyanide-laced Kool-Aid.
Tape recording from the SLA.
Mom, Dad, I'm okay. I'm with a combat unit that's armed with automatic weapons.
By 1979, a mother's worst nightmare was that her kids would join one of the strange new groups, and one of the strangest was the Moonies. Moon said he was here to unify the world's religions. He said his mass weddings, like this one at Madison Square Garden, could cleanse mankind of sexual evil left over from the Garden of Eden. He wanted to breed a glorious new race, born without sin, under the guidance of his philosophy, the divine principle. He was widely considered a dangerous lunatic, but he believed he could charm America. So he dressed up his followers as Revolutionary War heroes and pioneer women, and put on huge bicentennial rallies in New York and Washington. Flags and patriotic music would warm up the audience, and then Moon would take the stage and deliver a raging, nearly incomprehensible speech about Adam and Eve, God and Satan, and the coming Korean Messiah. Moon became a pop culture icon.
Good evening, I am the Reverend Sanyang Moon, leader of the Moonies. We have come for the God.
This kid's going back to her family.
Parents hired deprogrammers to ambush their lost children and bring them back, no questions asked. He also caught the attention of Congress. A House panel, shown here interviewing Moon's right-hand man, Bo Hee Pak, concluded that the Moon Organization was determined to gain power in Washington. Moon tried things like sending pretty female followers to Capitol Hill to soften up resistance. When that didn't work, he hit on his best idea yet, to start a newspaper for the new Reagan conservatives. The Washington Times published its first issue in 1982, and today it still has national influence. The paper often starts questionable stories that are then picked up by Bill O'Reilly, Rush Limbaugh, and others on the right, and move into the mainstream. Some of its greatest hits are, Michael Dukakis was mentally ill, Bill Clinton might have been an agent of influence for the KGB while traveling as a Rhodes Scholar, Saddam's weapons of mass destruction might have been moved to Syria, and the Minutemen were a huge army massing at the border with 16 airplanes, when in fact, there were never more than 200 people. This election season, Moon's Insight magazine published a story that's become an email favorite on the right, an absolutely untrue report that Barack Obama went to school at a hardline Islamic madrasa. Whenever the Washington Times throws parties to congratulate itself for all this, there's the risk of two worlds colliding. On the one hand, conservative Republicans who love what the paper does.
Normally, when I think of the Washington Beltway press corps, I think of, well, not going to say it, wouldn't be prudent. But when I think of the Washington Times, I think of a publication that has brought much-needed balance to the way Washington is covered these days.
On the other hand, there's Reverend Moon.
Man's sexual organs is for the sake of a woman. Of women's sexual organs are shaped as concave and convex. Why are they shaped that way? Absolute sex is centered on God, and free sex is centered on Satan. Historically, world literature and...
In 2000, when Moon purchased the legendary wire service United Press International, Helen Thomas quit rather than work for him. Today, UPI is a shell of its former self. Moon may not dominate the headlines like he used to, but these days his empire of influence peddling has become vast and far-flung, stretching from New York to Latin America to the Pacific Islands to Japan and Korea. In the heart of Manhattan is the New Yorker Hotel. It's an Art Deco landmark that Moon bought in 1976, closing it to the public for about 20 years and renaming it the World Mission Center. During the high-pressure heyday of the cult, several members fell to their deaths from its heights. Moon tried to improve his image by sending his followers out from the hotel with big brushes to scrub New York clean. The hotel is now open to the public again as a Ramada Inn with Mooney offices upstairs.
I heard this place is owned by Reverend Moon. Is that correct? Yeah, that's very correct. How long has he owned it? He's owning like almost 20 years, right? Do you ever see it? Is it true he has a penthouse? I've heard that he has a penthouse. He has a lot of things, obviously. Yeah. And so he stays up there and the whole floor. You guys aren't Moonies. Are you a Moon? No. You're not a cult member. He's the cult church member. I used to be. You used to be in the Moonies?
Next door is the Mooney-owned Manhattan Center Studios, which includes the famous concert venue, the Hammerstein Ballroom. Moon's other holdings would take all day to list. The cult has diversified into a staggering number of businesses, fake world peace groups, and faith-based front organizations that have received literally millions of dollars in dubious federal cash from the Bush administration. In this building in upstate New York, we found the global headquarters of Moon's Universal Peace Federation, one of his interchangeable front groups run by the same people and often with the same phone numbers. A post-it note on the door of one group, Wango, said that if no one was around, to go down the hall and knock on the door of the so-called Interreligious and International Federation for World Peace. For an organization with a budget of $13 million a year, not much seemed to be happening here.